Now, I've been asked to deliver a lecture entitled Essential Concepts and Methods in the Teaching and Researching of European Integration. And my first reaction to that was, well, that's a pretty broad topic. And then I looked at your program, and I see that a lot of the different points or dimensions that I probably would think ought to be conveyed are going to be, in fact, discussed or lectured on and discussed in more depth over the course of this and next week. So that led me to decide that what I'm going to do is give you an overview. That is not really a lot of depth in any one particular essential concept or method, but rather to try and provide an overview of teaching, and then just some research, not necessarily concepts and methods, but agendas. And I'm going to end with a brief presentation on a brand new research project that I'm involved with as a way of giving you an example of what went into, what questions were being asked, the research class was being asked, what research design was developed. The project itself, the funding will begin in January, so I can't give you any actual experiential data from this. But I can tell you, though, what went into a successful research proposal. And that, again, is by a way of introducing some essential methods and concepts in researching European integration. Well, I want to begin with teaching, and then we'll move on to research. All of you are, I suppose, at various stages in your PhD, whether it is the actual thesis itself, constructing it, or background reading, or close to completion, writing up. All of you presumably, and I'm just an assumption for purposes of this lecture, once you have your PhD or in the process of acquiring it, may actually want to become full-time academic scholars. And that means teaching. And primarily, I would suppose that your teaching will be aimed at undergraduates. And since you're at summer school dealing with European integration, presumably in your undergraduate careers, you had classes on European integration, on the European Union. So one question I ask myself is, what added value could I give you, since you've already been at the receiving end of teaching about the European Union and European integration? Well, what I decided to do would be to give you a sense of what you want to teach exactly. And in the course of the lecture, I'm going to differentiate between teaching about the European Union and teaching about European integration. So, here we go. As you are probably all aware, most textbooks on the European Union set out mostly to describe. There's a general format I think you're all familiar with. There's history, institutions, policies. And usually you'll find a specific set of policies. Some textbooks are much more comprehensive. You'll find single market, economic and monetary union, foreign and security policy, agriculture. You can then add on. If you look at the textbooks edited by Helen Wallace, for instance, you'll try to get a comprehensive, the Oxford University Press book, everything from biotechnology to competition policy. The institutions will at least cover the major four: the Commission, the Council of Ministers, the Court of Justice, and the European Parliament. The more detailed the textbook, then the next tier of institutions. Where there is some presentation or discussion of European integration, it's usually confined to a chapter on theories of European integration. That's usually, as I say, a chapter on theories of European integration. And in various editions, then a new theory will be added, such that multi-level governance for instance, is now one that is usually included with neo-functionalism, intergovernmentalism, or liberal intergovernmentalism, etc. The book that I mentioned for this lecture by Ben Rosamond is one of the things that departs from that, and itself is devoted to theories of European integration. So if your intent, and this is one of the key points I want to make about teaching, if your intent in teaching is to describe what is the European Union and how it has developed up to the present, in a basic class for undergraduates, there's plenty from which to choose what I've just described. Textbook, maybe a reader with a collection of classic articles, and then up-to-date articles in various journals. So if your intent is to basically produce a class to inform, this is the European Union and this is how it works, then you could, off the web, take reading lists and syllabi. That is pretty straightforward. On the other hand, if teaching European integration is your intent, then a nice package, textbook plus reader and some articles, requires a bit more work. The first question you would then ask yourself in teaching a class, whether it's to say mid-level undergraduates or an upper-level seminar, or even a graduate seminar, an initial one on European integration, is what is it? What do we mean when we say European integration, integration of Europe? You could say, oh, it means the ever closer union of the peoples of Europe. Of course, then you could get into the issue of the semantics of people and peoples, etc. But if we look at what has been the study of European integration, then there are several notions of European integration. If you say that European integration means the building of institutions at a supranational level, the creation of European Union institutions and authoritative governance from that level, and consequently certain policies, that will lead the direction you take in explaining European integration. If you suggest that European integration is the integrating of certain sectors of various national economies, whether you call it a common market, as was the case in the 60s, or a single market in the last 15 years or so, that may focus your level of analysis and presentation of teaching material. If European integration means the political union of the member states, and if in fact the development of a federal union, that will also lead you in terms of the materials that you collect and then present. If European integration essentially means for you the transformation of European nation states, and European integration, the development of the EU is the byproduct of this transformation, then that will lead you in terms of the questions that you pose to your students and the agendas that you want to convey week after week in your lectures. If European integration means the development of a regional bloc, then obviously you're, to some extent, going to be including trade issues, or if you want to use terms of the new regionalism, then, for instance, the recent edited book by Keele would be the kinds of material that you would bring about. And then lastly, again, there may be other definitions of European integration. For some, European integration means the return to Europe by Eastern European countries, that in a sense European enlargement, the enlargement of the members of the European Union is in fact a manifestation of the recreation of a pan-European system. So some of these are obviously interconnected. But what I'm trying to convey is that when you want to teach about European integration, you first have to decide what is it exactly that you want to convey to students. Maybe what you want to do is to go over every single one of these dimensions. And then you would proceed, especially if we're talking about a seminar or a graduate level one, in looking at the literature that's developed in each of these areas. So your intent is, again, important. Your intent, if you're teaching about the European Union, is fairly straightforward. If your intent is to teach about European integration, then you have a more multidimensional task at hand. Now, depending on what you want to convey to students as part of the European integration, you will then necessarily, probably more so than if you were simply going to try and teach what is the European Union and how it works, the theoretical literature will become much more significant. For instance, if you want to discuss more the building of institutions at the European level, why certain competences and policies have been developed at the European Union level, you may decide that a focus on elite interaction would be more profitable. And consequently, you're going to expose your students to literature ranging from realist intergovernmentalism from Stanley Hoffman through the liberal intergovernmentalism of Ladrech. And I'm not, by the way, trying to be really comprehensive here. So you all can probably think of additional names to slot in or other theories. What I'm trying to do right now is simply say that what particular definition of European integration you may have in general for week by week in teaching about it necessitates another subpart of the, I won't quite call it yet the canon of European integration, but the general literature on European integration. If the integrating of various sectors of economies and the development, consequently at the European level of the institutions to regulate this is your focus, then you'll be introducing your students to the literature beginning with functionalism, neo-functionalism from Ernst Haas up to new neo-functionalism, Sandholt's edited book, et al. If you are trying to describe and explain the European integration and how it, to some extent, transformed nation-states by looking at the interconnection between national levels with sub- and supranational levels, this may lead you to presenting your students with Marx and Engels' multi-level governance and others that have decided this is a profitable way of reimagining how the different levels of authoritative actors and actions combine. So these are connected. The literatures that you're going to select depend upon the particular description of and definition of European integration that you choose. Your students may ask, is there a unified theory of European integration? Since many people think that a more expedient and efficient way of trying to encapsulate this phenomenon might be the development of something like this. I probably counsel you to convey to your students, and at this point in time, this is following a recent paper by Olson, that the study of European integration does not provide, and perhaps the word yet ought not even to come into the picture, a unified theory, but it's a collection of middle-range theories. Now, the task of a teacher might be to look at potential linkages between these. But this also depends upon what question you're trying to answer at various weeks various points in your class on European integration. So this is the first point, that apart from simply a class on how the EU works, if European integration is what you're trying to teach, then you are presented with the field of study of European integration, and you're going to select then various approaches that are going to be linked with answering certain questions of the why and how of European integration. We could also dwell for a brief few seconds on other approaches to teaching, not necessarily analytical approaches to teaching. So, for instance, one of the things I mentioned for this lecture is something that's hosted by the European Union Studies Association, and they're teaching on the EU, and that is simulation. Now, if you embark on this route, then presumably, and I don't myself, but presumably you're going to be emphasizing explicitly or not elite interaction, bargaining amongst political elites, and in this sense, then you'll, whether directly or indirectly, find yourself with an intergovernmentalist emphasis. Case studies is another way that many try to convey the impact of European integration. So we have integration and the impact of European integration. Case studies have usually focused on either comparative presentation of certain policies. So, for instance, the implementation of road haulage in various member states, or case studies may focus on a particular country or a comparison of countries. So you have books such as France and the European Union, or Germany and the European Union. This approach will depend obviously upon a much more broader and deeper presentation of all the variables, or at least certain highlights you will find in presenting a discussion on the impact of European integration in the Netherlands compared to Italy, for instance. Political structure, political culture, all these other variables will come into play. Institutional analysis will also be one of the approaches to teaching, and to a large extent trying to explain the development, for instance, of the impact of rules in the European Parliament in connection with the Council of Ministers, etc. The development of the European Council would be one of the approaches to teaching about certain aspects of European integration. Finally, following an article by Simon Hicks published several years ago, do you want to teach about the European Union or European integration as a branch of international relations, or as comparative politics? If the former, and I think over time trying to teach European integration, especially as well as the EU, as a branch of international relations become a bit more difficult. That's just my thought. If the former, then again you're going to emphasize certain sets of theories and approaches to the study of the EU as an international organization. If the latter, then the EU, seen as an emergent political system or an emergent political system, will be presented its institutions and functions, and here the key point here is functions, as one would do roughly with any domestic political system. Consequently, additional areas may be added in terms of trying to convey to the students what is European integration, or the development of the European Union. For instance, public opinion. The study of public opinion on the EU will become now a necessary ingredient. And this may be linked to questions of legitimacy. How do you convey the legitimacy of this political system to students. Consequently, the functions then of the system become important. Whereas the former approach, international relations, may not inquire into this area at all, not necessarily. Now, to sum up this section of the lecture on teaching, the concepts and methods you will employ in teaching about the European Union or on European integration depends upon your intent. That is, what exactly you want to have the students understand. For many students, it may be enough just to know, of course this is part of the aims and objectives that you'll have for a particular class. It may be enough to simply know how the EU works. And if you are tasked with teaching a basic undergraduate class on this is the EU, that may be enough. For others, answers or at least questions about why sovereign nation states have embarked on a journey which in the process has created a new type of political entity will be more engaging. And I would suggest that in trying to teach about European integration, that would be one of the key questions that you'll begin a class on. Why has this process begun? And that will immediately get you into the literature trying to approach this question from a variety of methods. And I know later this week and next week, if not later today, you'll have the first of many approaches, which I'll be mentioning in passing only: rational choice, institutionalism, etc. So that, for the moment, then, is what I want to say concerning teaching about the European Union and European integration. I'll now move on to a discussion, presentation, talk on researching European integration. I suggest that at the end of that, we take a break, and then we'll reconvene to discuss various points that you want to pursue. So I've also been asked to talk about essential concepts and methods in researching European integration. Well, all of you have already had to ask yourself about what it is you want to a dissertation, get your PhD in particular. And presumably all of you have gotten past what research design do I need to answer such questions. But I think it's obvious the first question with any attempt to embark on research is, what do you want to explain? Now, leaving aside for the moment issues of dependent and independent variables, regarding European integration, you ask yourself what it is exactly you're seeking to explain. Are you seeking to explain new behavior in old actors? Are you seeking to explain the creation of new institutions, why these were created, or why they perform in a certain way, or over time why old institutions have changed, both at the European level and at the national level? Or is it the very process of change, whether that means adaptation or creation of new behavioral institutions? What exactly is it that you want to explain? To some extent, that focus will be methods. Certain institutional behavior can be explained using the tools of, it's mentioned, rational choice, institutionalism. If your interest is to explain why actors' behavior changes, perhaps you might decide that sociological institutionalist or even social constructivist orientation may be more fruitful. If you're seeking to explain divergence in the national application or implementation of EU directives or policies more generally, that is another comparative enterprise, then you'll need a broader and deeper analysis, perhaps. I know that you'll have a talk by Heretier, and her and others have tried to explain why certain policies are implemented differently in member states. What is your intent again? What is it you're seeking to explain? Explain the actual policy? Are you seeking to explain the mechanisms at the national level? Are you seeking to explain, prior to the implementation, the types of negotiations that found national negotiators agreeing to the shape of certain policies? Some concepts, especially regarding the adaptation of domestic actors to the European Union or to European integration, are fuzzy. They lack a certain precision, or many reinterpret or redefine or define for themselves what a particular term means. And so consequently, certain concepts are going to require on your part some precision if you are going to employ them. One example of this is Europeanization. So what I'm going to do for a moment is talk a little bit about Europeanization. Presumably, I'm here because of some connection I have with the term Europeanization. And the reason I want to discuss this is because if you were to measure the growth of the use of this term in books and articles over the last 5 years, you see that it's become popular. However, one thing to also quickly realize is it's used differently. And consequently, there's now more attention, I think, to first defining what is meant by it. Now, if you look over the literature of the last 5 or 6 years when the term Europeanization has been used, you'll notice the different meanings. There's an article about the British Labour Party, about the Europeanization of the British Labour Party. Without ever giving a definition, it was clear from reading the article that the author meant a political party changing from let's call it a hostile attitude towards the European Union to a more positive embrace. So the author meant, without saying it explicitly, that Europeanization meant becoming pro-European. And I'd say mid to late 1990s that was one of the more widespread uses of the term Europeanization, especially with political parties or countries becoming more pro-European. From the late 1990s onwards, the use of the term in more analytical fashion has come into use. And I'd say that we now have a bit more of a rigorous understanding or use of the term Europeanization. It's conceived of, on one hand, as a top-down process, and here we mean the impact of European integration on domestic actors and institutions. That is, trying to understand the process of adaptation and change in domestic systems. Top, supranational level inputs down to domestic politics. There's a bottom-up understanding of European integration, and this is trying to understand the creation of European-level institutions and authoritative governance. I think Thomas Rissa will be here in your summer school and his recently edited book with Callas and Caparosso defined the Europeanization along these lines. In a recent paper by Simon Bulmer and Christian Lecan, Europeanization is again looked at, and they add that even though one can conceive of top-down and bottom-up dynamics, it may be more fruitful to think of the interactive dimension of these arrows, if you want to put it that way. That is, that the larger system in which the supra and national, and for that matter, subnational levels are embedded influence those very dynamics. So it's an interactive, think of feedback that explains some of the behavior and pursuits of most actors. In using the word European